Okay, so great. Edwin has already done an introduction, and I'm not one to talk a lot about myself. I believe that it's time for us to get down to business. So I'm going to be talking this morning this afternoon about improving nutrition through a gender inclusivity lens. First, just a brief introduction of the institution that I work with and where we are. So I work with the Center for International Tropical Agriculture. We actually have the headquarters in, there's a slide actually before this one. We have the headquarters in Colombia, and then in Nairobi is one of our regional offices. We also have another regional office in Vietnam, and another in Central America. So we do different things at CIAT. If you go to the next slide, we have the Pan-African Beans Alliance. That's basically where I do a lot of my work. But we also have those who work on climate risk assessment, like the CARS. We work also with Harvest Plus, especially in promoting the beans that we produce. But then also we partner with IFPRI in what we call the big data platform. But today I'm going to be focusing on what I do with the Pan-African Beans Alliance. We are in 30 countries across West Africa, Eastern Africa, as well as Central Africa. So why is gender lens important in nutrition? We all know that when you look at gender, when you look at nutrition, we're all part of poverty circle. And why do I say that? Apart from what I've put here, all the presentations we've had this morning have made it quite clear that about 60% of the world are actually hungry, most of them women and girls. And also we have like 25% of that under 5. I don't even have to talk about adolescent girls, lactating mothers, pregnant women, teenagers that are also even pregnant. We have all this category of people. But this doesn't mean that nutrition is only about women. We had a question this morning, and the guy was asking, we're talking only about women, what about the men? Actually, nutrition and gender, it's one which includes also men. And why is that? Maybe we go back to what we consider as gender. Gender is not only actually empowering women. I mean, it's quite clear that women have limited access to resources compared to men, productive access to resources. But also then if you look at nutrition, for example, it's mostly the women who do the cooking. It's mostly the women who determine the quantity of food that the man would eat or the children would eat. But in most households, it's the men who actually buy the food. So if the men also don't have this background on how important nutrition is or what nutritious food we should eat, we already see that it's a very big gap. Now, when we talk on gender and we talk on nutrition, it's been made clear this morning, I mean, this is just reiterating on what we had this morning, that agriculture is very important. And why is agriculture important? If you look at, for example, beans production, it's women who produce beans, but it's the men who actually market the beans, and it's the men who decide on what happens with the money from these beans. So then the question is, like we also had the presentation still this morning, is what are we going to do to make sure that men also get into the production circle? What are we going to do to make sure that women who are out of the marketing circle are able to go back there? But also then how can we make sure that women have a certain control, maybe not complete control over the income that they get from the produce that they produce? Those are questions which later on in my slides I would answer some, but also some would still be food for thought because it's not something that we completely have an answer to yet. Now if we look at the synergies between nutrition and gender, it's quite clear that when we look at nutrition, there's always education because you need to change people's behavior. You need to change people's attitude. And who are these people we're talking about? We're talking about men, we're talking about women, we're talking about youths. So definitely, you can't have nutrition education without having gender. As well as you can talk about gender alone without bringing nutrition, because that is part of the consumption side That's part of the production side as well as even the distribution side. I would get to that. Just to go to the next slide, what do we do at PABRA? So at PABRA, I'm more or less the gender specialist for SEAT, but also then working with PABRA. And what we do is we make sure that gender is integrated in all activities that we do. So when you're breathing, you have to think of gender. When you're doing nutrition, there has to be gender. When you're thinking of climate change, which is actually very real, we see increase in rainfalls, we see the temperature going up, we see farmers asking us now, when do I plant? Because before I used to plant in May, but I can't, or before I would actually know that if I plant by this time, I'm going to get my crops ready at this time, but that's not what's happening. So we think of gender as well there. And even looking at the markets, we had presentations this morning or this afternoon talking about market linkages. We have to look at gender as well. That's very important. Knowledge management, soils, seed system, all of this gender is quite important. Just a background on what we do at PABRA. So we have what we call the commodity corridor approach. And what does that mean? That means, for example, for beans, we're interested in where is beans produced. We're also interested in the distribution routes to getting beans to the market. And who are those who consume it? This goes back to what we call the value chain. The reason is because if you focus on only one part of the value chain without looking at the others, and then you miss a lot. If you look at the value chain, you would be able to tell where women are, where they're missing, where they're men, where men are missing, but then it helps you to be able to reflect on how to bring men and women together to be able to sustainably carry out a certain agricultural activity, whether it's producing beans, whether it's actually distributing it, consuming it, or marketing it, and what you do then with that money that you have. So this is like the best slide I have. I always love this. I'm like, when you're producing, distributing, and when you're even consuming, if we talk of beans or we talk of amaranth, definitely you have to look at it with a gender lens as well as a nutrition lens. So there are two issues that are integrated, which if taken separately, then we lose the point in a lot of what we do. For example, at the production cycle, when we're doing breeding, we have what we call the participatory varietal selection. There we have men and we have women who would come and say what bean traits they're interested in and why. Now we're extending that to what we're calling the demand-led breeding, and we would be coming up with gender guidelines. So the whole idea of the demand-led breeding is moving just from men and women who are farmers, but also bringing in men and women who are processors, wholesalers, and retailers, because we realize that the beans we produce actually are for so many things. It could be a market class, meaning that it's produced but mainly for the market, like we have the white pea beans in Ethiopia. It could actually be a beans which the woman knows if they sell everything, at least with this thread of beans, I would be able to go back and produce something for my family. Another thing we're doing is making sure that even when we're doing the characterization, so checking for gender gaps, nutrition gaps, we also would have like sex disaggregated data collection. So we're collecting information on men, on women, but amongst women as well, we're collecting information. So the problem, for example, a pregnant woman would have is different from a problem that a woman who is not pregnant would have, or one who is educated and one who is not, as well as one, for example, who has a paid job and one who doesn't have a paid job. So intersectionality comes into this. So it's not only just the gender lens, but also very much from an intersectional point of view, where we're looking at the social categories of people. Religion also, it's something that comes into it, is very important, as well as ethnicity, because this determines what we consume, why we consume it, and sometimes why we even keep consuming it if we are not convinced that we should move to something more nutritious. At the production level, we also have what we call safety measures. These are also, farmers are trained on this. So how, for example, are you able to harvest your amaranth leaf or harvest your beans, but making sure that you don't have certain particles in it that in the end is going to affect your health when you consume it. We have beans, which is biofortified with iron and zinc. And that's because when we had beans, first of all, biofortified with iron, the men said, yeah, iron is forward anemia. That's women, when they have the menstrual cycle, they need that when they're pregnant, they do. But what of us men? What have you guys put there for us? Are you guys thinking about us as well? And so then we saw the need to have beans that is fortified with iron and zinc as well. So we are not thinking only of women, we're thinking of the household. When you have the distribution chain as well, you know, a lot of things happen there. Even when you're processing it. What do you take into consideration? Women would say we're interested in the cooking time. So we had a collaboration with our partners at the Cornell University to be able to find out from the different bean varieties which ones cook faster. And that's because I'm sure the women here who are in the kitchen all the time understand the hours you use in cooking beans. And I'm sure the men also feel the pockets when you have to either get that gas or you have to get like fuel to make sure that you have beans in the household. So we are working on that. But another thing, is it okay? Yeah. Another thing we are also making sure we look at is the labor-saving technologies. So like we heard today, women do a lot of the production work. But also then they have a second shift, which is taking care of the child and doing the domestic chores. So there definitely is drudgery. And with that, we are still saying that agricultural production, the yields are very low. And we expect farmers to increase these yields, to increase the volume. A woman who already has a lot, who is overloaded with what she's doing, how do you get her then to produce more? So we also have labor-saving technologies. I'm going to show you that just in a minute, to reduce some of the activities that women do on farm. But the idea of some of these technologies also is to bring men on farm who usually would not do that, like planting of beans. I actually had men who told me that they don't plant beans, not because they don't want to, because the women love to do it. And the way a woman's body is made, it's so easy. Actually, the guy actually described it to me. So it's like you can easily, you know, all the turning to plant the beans. But he says men are stiff, and so it's difficult for them to do it. I will let the women answer that, because the women just laughed. Like, I have women laughing here. And the man was like, so women love it. But then we also had women who would say that if left on their own, they would prefer to take a day to plant the beans, but if the men would escort them to the farm, they would end up using like 3 days, because the men don't want to stay in the farm for long. So it's like after 2 hours, he needs to come back home, dress up, and go out, you know, with his friends. Not so, ladies. So then that was something that got us thinking as well. When you look at beans, for example, immediately you get it out of the farm. The man doesn't come until when you have it ready. So women do the threshing, women do the winnowing and all that. So we were also thinking which technologies can we introduce at that stage to reduce the labor for the women, but also to sort of like bring the men into that area of activity. That way we're lessening the work that the women have to do, and then they would have time for more reproductive or productive activities. So if we go to the first, it's just a short video. This shows a manual planter. We have this in Ethiopia, but it's just been piloted, but not yet tested, because also it's expensive. We're trying to bring in the private sector to see if they can subsidize it and get it to farmers, but we're not yet there.
How do we get the video?
There's supposed to be like a link to the video. If you just click on it. No, the first one. Yeah, if you click on this, just click here. Let me just check, because actually there is So what happens is you have the different seeds there, and now with the bull pulling it, it's actually just planting it. And the nice thing is when you have mechanization, the men would always say that this is for us. So this way we don't get to tell the men get to the farm, but automatically they will do what? They get to the farm. So it reduces the work then that women would be doing, and you get the men doing the production. I think what I learned is very often when you tell someone to do something, then the person feels pressured, and it's like you're my wife, and you shouldn't be telling me what to do. But if you have a technology like this, indirectly the person gets to do that without being told. So we can move to the next technology. The next slide. Yeah, you just click on it as well. And, yeah. So that's a bean thresher. And you see the nice thing is the men are standing in front, and the women are sort of like trying to push to even do pictures, because the men believe that this mechanization is meant for them and not really for women. So the interesting thing is here we get the men into these activities, and it reduces the burden on the women, and they're able then to focus on other nutrition activities or other productive activities if they so wish. So what it does is it takes the chaff to one side, and then you're going to have the beans on another side. It's actually very good. How do they call this? Most of the beans you're going to get is still whole. So that's the beans. And now it's easy because women don't need to do a lot of the threshing, but now just the winnowing. Actually, you have many cases where you would find women with babies on the backs. You know, when you have to do it, you have to do it. Yeah, so then if we go to the next, we're just going to see different products, for example, that we've been able to produce. And what I love about the products we've been able to produce is that these products are meant for different actors. So it's not just for one person. If we move to the next slide. So on the left, that we have is high iron beans. This was just released in Tanzania, I think last month, by the team that works here, the SIA team and Pabra. In the middle of that, you would have a bean flour. This is being promoted in the base of the pyramid areas in Uganda and in Kenya. So this bean flour is meant actually for the most vulnerable of the most vulnerable. You know, in most cases, we always think of poor people in the rural areas, but what we forget is in the urban areas, you have the very rich, those in the middle, but also then you have those who are very poor, who sometimes don't even have land as those in the rural areas to be able to produce anything. On the tight side, what we do is, when we're launching these bean products, we make sure that you have the community as a part of it. Because issues always are when you have projects and the people don't own what you're doing, immediately you leave, they let it slide. So, but if they believe that this is good for us, then definitely they're going to keep with it.
Next slide.
No, just the last one. And then another very important thing that related to my question I asked this morning is to have nutritious food, we're thinking of combining different flours. And it's very important that we know what are the different nutrients in these different flours. And the question is, if we combine it, do we lose the essence of the nutrients we want to pass on to the people or not? A very good example is we have a flour which was about to be launched, and what we realized was we had a mixture of different flours, amaranth flour, bean flour, maize flour, millet flour, but also then she was thinking of putting milk. And what we realized was if you put milk, milk absorbs the iron. So then the essence of having beans, which has protein and iron and zinc, goes away. The iron and the zinc goes away. So it's also something that we have to really think at the back of our minds, how we present these nutrition educational messages. And I don't know if possible a way of harmonizing it. I know, for example, in Burundi, we work with World Vision. And if we keep these partnerships and collaborations, then it would be easy to actually pass these messages where people don't feel like they're getting different messages and sometimes are not quite sure what to do with it. At the end of it, I had this picture of a woman frying cakes. You know, that's important, but then the question we should think is we should go back to the culture. If we teach someone how to do cakes or biscuits in the rural area, when you leave, will this person really do cakes and biscuits, even when he has an important guest coming? Does he have the resources to be able to do the cakes and the biscuits? So as much as we want to put nutrition there, we should also be mindful of the social-cultural factors that are quite important. What can we do? I was talking about the intersectional approach, where we are not looking only at men, at women, at youths, but we're also looking at other people that are important. Lactating mothers, adolescents, looking at even boys. The Kenyan Health and Demographic Survey showed that adolescent boys were more anemic and stunted than the girls. And the question was actually why? I mean, there was no answer there. And the first thing that popped in my mind is when you have a young boy, it's okay for him to go out and play. The mothers are not so bothered because the idea always is a boy, so he can take care of himself. And he comes back, and when he gets back home, he's so hungry, he just wants to eat. So maybe a large bowl of ugali, and he doesn't really mind, he just wants to fill his stomach. And maybe the ladies, because you're with the mother all the time, then you really get to, every once in a while, if you're hungry, she gets something for you, maybe more nutritious. So those are things we also have to factor in when we're doing the nutrition education. Knowing that there's this intersectional approach to it. If we have a nutritious meal we want to give to someone who is pregnant, it would definitely differ from someone who is HIV positive. It would definitely differ from someone who is an adolescent but pregnant. And then also, I put the church as a channel for nutrition education. And the reason is because when we want to launch a product, that's when we go to the church. It's easy to reach people. But the question is, have we ever thought of integrating nutrition as part of the service? Where people don't hear about nutrition only when there's a new product in the market, but it's something that they listen to every day or every Sunday. And then it becomes a part and parcel of the person. That's how you can change an attitude or behavior of someone. If you only come when there is something happening, people are not stupid. I love to say that. They would realize that you come only when you need something from them. So definitely they will tell you everything you want to hear, and when you leave, nothing is happening. But if it's something that we get to hear every week, then we start thinking about it. Even those who don't want to think will sort of like start dreaming about it. And then it becomes something where you think about it, and then you start getting convinced that really this thing is important, it's good for me, it's good for my family, and then it's only then that that person is going to actually do it. Actually, one of the problems we're having now is a product we want to launch in the BOP in Kenya. And the issue is you have people who actually millers who would mill different types of flours. And now we have this product which has like 6 different types of flours combined into one. And so the question people are asking is, why should I buy this combined product you have for 70 shillings when I can go to the millers and get them to mix maybe 3 or 4, maybe not up to 5 for 50 shillings. So what makes yours unique from mine? And this is not something you can just tell someone, I don't know, in a week when you want to introduce your product in the market. It's something that the person has to really understand and be convinced that what you're giving him is better than what is already out there in the market. So these are things we have to think of. Also, the appearance of food. Growing up, I would eat whatever my mom gave me. That's because it's more like a culture. Food actually is a culture. As you move on, you keep taking what is behind there. But let's be very honest. Now with the social media and the internet, and everyone is able to look at food, appearance now also is taking precedence. We actually have nice school feeding programs. That's an example I'm going to use. If I'm in my mom's house, whatever she gives me, I just might eat it. Because maybe if I don't eat, that's what my mom used to do to me, then you sleep hungry. But if I go somewhere where I have a choice, I would want to pick something that looks nicer compared to something else. And at that stage, nutrition is not the first thing that comes to mind. So maybe also what we need to think of on improving is, as we put out nutritious food, it should also look nice. And then you would have a lot more of the younger generation picking up that food. Because in most cases, we go according to what we see. Imagine you have a tomato with a lot of chemicals, but it's looking beautiful and nice. And you have another one and it's not so looking nice. When you go to the market, which one would you pick? The one which really looks nice. Okay. Also, another thing is bringing out stakeholders. I mean, I love the multi-sectional approach that was presented this morning. But what I always worry is, even though it's very important to have this institutional structure in place, we should not forget that we are taking whatever we do to the people. We're taking whatever we do to different families. And if these people don't understand what we're doing, even if at that institutional level we have this very nice program, which is very good for them, they won't embrace it. The people need to own whatever it is that we're doing. So we need to find ways to get them to understand what we're doing, why, but also listen to what they have to say. So what are the challenges? I mean, I already talked of the food cultures and the taboos that we have. Also, if we have processed foods, how do we make sure that we mix them in a way that they're still nutritious? Decision making on income. We have different technologies we've introduced in Uganda. I'll be going to May, where we're going to be talking about another one. The idea is having an app. I don't know if many people know of it. It's called Tukunze. So we want to use that same method and bring it to beans, where farmers would be able to sit with processors, with those who are producing the beans in one platform and discuss on how do we produce the beans, where do we get finance from, who do we market it to, but also most importantly, how do they get the payment? You know, if a woman has cash and she goes home, it's easy for the husband to say, I was told you made 2,000 shillings, can I have 1,000 shillings? And you can't say no. But if you have it given maybe 500 to M-Pesa, you have 500 else to a bank account, and you have 1,000 shillings, then he would be able to get maybe 500 of the 2,000 shillings. That way, the woman gets control over the income she's using, without the man feeling as if he's being told, you know, I'm not going to give you the 1,000, I'm going to give you only 500. That would bring domestic violence. So we are looking for ways in which we are able to get to the women who have limited resources compared to the men, but without standing in the faces of the men. You know, when it's done subtly, and I don't feel like I'm being pushed, then it's easy for me to accept that, than when I feel like you're actually really pushing me to do what I don't feel that I should do. Thank you very much.
How do you draw conclusions when you use the male and the female for drawing any, you're testing some amaranthus, 2 varieties for taste, okay, that is an example, and then you get a contradictory opinion from a male and the female. It's like 50% of the males say this is good and 60% of the women say this is good. So how do you come up with that?
Okay. I'll just answer the questions because I don't have a pen and paper here. But now when you're doing plant breeding, it's actually very detailed what you have to do. So you get people to pick the traits and why they think that is good for them. But also then you have like principles of plant breeding. So they need to think of what are the resources that we have. Do we have those germplasms available, for example? But then also when you have all of this, they have to prioritize it. So in breeding, you would have what they call the niche. So maybe that's something that the men think is not important, the women think is important, but it's a niche for the women. Also, it could be a market class. So maybe it's something which doesn't really contribute to nutrition, but it contributes to income. And we look at it as if you have income, and then of course you can buy nutritious food, as well as you can also get healthcare. So you have like 4 different categories, but definitely there's always trade-offs. And with these trade-offs, you can never really tell who is going to suffer more. So of course you would have some beans which are out there, and it's one of the characteristics is cooking time. So it's reducing it maybe from 3 hours to 1 hour or to 30 minutes. But then also you have bean products like parboiled beans or pre-cooked beans, which eases the cooking at home. But then you might also have maybe a lot more market classes, which is what men are going for. So there are always these trade-offs, and sometimes it leans on one side or the other. Are you okay?
Yeah, I know it leads on.
Yeah.
How do you, whether you will go to variety A, which which the men like, or the variety B, which the women like, or, yeah, that is my question.
So usually what will happen is you're going to have a mix of those varieties. If I look at the bean varieties, for example, that you would not have all of them that have a reduced cooking time. But then you would not have all of them that are market classes. So for example, in Tanzania, you would have more than 20 different varieties. And in these varieties, you're going to have traits that either lean more on what women want or men want. And it's even difficult for you to have a household that would grow only one variety. So usually there would be a market variety, but also then there would be a variety that is consumed in the house, which has a lot more like the cultural adherence to it, where they grow it because of the taste, they grow it because that's what they've eaten for a very long time. And definitely they are not stopping to grow that variety. What is important that we should note as well is most crops, when they are still subsistence, where there's very little income that comes from it, it's a woman's crop. Beans has always been a woman's crop, but now it's becoming more commercialized. Men are the ones selling it, and they're the ones deciding on what happens to it. It's the same thing with groundnuts. Even amaranth, now we have a project where we are promoting amaranth leaves. So we get the women, we provide them with bubble dryers, and they dry the amaranth, and they package it. But immediately that starts bringing a lot of income. Then the men say, as a woman, you can't handle this money, it's too much. Let me help you and handle it. Even if it's beans, if it's a bag of beans, it's not a problem. But if it's 5 bags, definitely he's doing it. And also there are cultures that even promote that, where they say the woman can stand very close to the man when they're measuring the beans. So then the brokers take advantage to actually tamper with the cages. But then the man would say, you see, when you go to sell it, they cheat you. But when I go to sell it, they don't cheat me. But we all know it's that cultural barrier which is there that doesn't permit the woman to go closer to the broker when he's actually doing the measurement. So what I love, or what I always say is, when we produce something, whether it's to consume or it's for sale, it's for the benefit of the household. And the question should be, we've let men do it for a long time. We still have problems. That means you need help. So why not let the women help you, and then as a family, you do the job.
Thank you. I am actually thinking of a different aspect. We come from households where mothers were the ones that stay at home and take care of the family and everything. And now, because of the technology and women empowerment, now women are moving away and are moving out for income generating activities. And this is somehow compromising to the nutrition status of their families, because most of the kids are being left at home, and some of the women cannot sometimes produce enough nutritious food for their families. I can give you one example. And for example, in Kilimanjaro, where I come from, now women are doing a lot of businesses away from home, and kids are left at home alone, and sometimes they're left to eat just anything that is around, and they don't take care of the kids as much. And as a result, we end up getting kids who are malnourished. Now, as you've presented, I just want to ask, do you do much of have you come around such kind of a thing? And if that has happened, what do you do? Do you educate people on, do you educate them on how to do that in order to help nutrition status of their families, focusing on the children?
Okay, thanks. That's actually a very important question. When I just started my job, when I was like 5 months into it, I went to a place called Nakuru. And it was close to International Women's Day, so I was interested in knowing like what roles, responsibilities women have, and what are the different structures in the households. Because it's not always the same everywhere. And also with the different ethnicities we are from, there are so many changes, so many differences. I don't love saying male-headed, female-headed households, because where are the women in the male-headed households? And sometimes even in the female-headed households, it's a man somewhere that actually determines what happens. I came across 3 different types of households. One, the woman was actually teaching, she was a headmistress, and the man was a stay-home, do I call him a stay-home husband, dad? Yeah. So now, he decides on what the children eat. He's the one who goes to the farm to produce the food. She only comes during the weekends. And of course, then you have the typical one we all know of, where the woman stays at home, she does everything, and it's the man who eats the breadwinner of the family. But everything in this household was working. The children had no problem, they were fine. And the reason why? I think it goes back to what I said. Nutrition, education, production, distribution of any agricultural product is not only for a man or only for a woman. It's for a household. So that means the man should be trained as well as the woman should be trained, as well as even youths in the household should be knowledgeable about this. So even if the woman is the one that goes out to look for the money to bring in, the man would know what to provide for the children. We actually have some men who are actually good at taking care of the children than women. You would agree. So now the issue always is when the focus is on one side and then the household suffers. Because if all the training about nutrition goes only to women and the woman is not in the house, it's a problem. And that's why when you have trainings on mechanization, trainings on post-harvest losses, trainings on agricultural productivity, it's the men who go. Because they always say, if my wife leaves the house will fall apart. And then I ask him, really the house will fall apart? And he's like, yes. But then the woman who is working, doing all this production activity doesn't get that training. So if this training actually becomes gender responsive, then we would not have a problem in the household. Because everyone would contribute what he or she can to make sure that we move forward, which is what? Alleviating hunger, which is addressing the food security crisis we have, which is making sure then that we have nutritious food and then the health is taken care of.